So we're really excited to be here this afternoon and share with you guys an overview of our journey building a red team. We're going to give you a few highlights from each year of our progress of building the red team, kind of give you a sense of how we had to build the red team up slowly. Oh, actually, for the note takers, these slides are scheduled to be tweeted here in about 30 minutes. I think about 16:30 is what I have it scheduled for, so be on the lookout for that for the note takers. So hey, I'm Robert, 14 years in InfoSec, probably like 15 years now. It's been a couple of months since we built this. 7 years, seven of those years was with NSA. I started and lead the red team here at USAA, and presenting here with one of my red team members, David.
You just said that. All right, so as you can see, I spent 6.5 years with the Air Force doing volume assessments with the NSA over at the fort with Robert. After that, I left the Air Force, worked for Johns Hopkins, came and worked down here as a pen tester, doing assessments on spacecraft and planes and all that kind of fun stuff. So now, currently, I lead the new detections team, and I'm also a member of the red team. And so, if you couldn't tell, we work at USA for. We've got, what, 28,000 employees or so. There's one full-time red teamer, and then myself and Josh in the back, who are part-timers. All right, so we presented this slide about 3 months ago. It was a red and blue conference, and a week prior, they changed it to a purple teaming conference. So this was not well received.
But it's true.
Yeah. So, in our minds, right, we see purple teaming kind of as that new buzzword, next gen and all that kind of fun stuff. It's to build that, it's trying to fix that division between red team and blue team. But honestly, all purple teaming really is just red teaming done right. It's working with the blue team, running the latest TTPs, the latest bypasses, all that kind of fun stuff that you see on Twitter and in the intel reports and all that kind of fun stuff day in and day out to make them better. All right, so we come from a company that is super conservative with regards to risk avoidance. Risk is just something that the company does not want to play chicken with. Brand reputation and uptime is the highest priority at USAA. I don't know if anybody here are members, but we have one main bank, and then everything else for the most part is all online. So if your company or your leadership at whatever level, is very risk avoidance, trust us, we know your pain, and we're going to talk to you how we got through it. All right, so the big thing is you need to crawl before you walk before you run before you drive before you fly. And this is going to be our talk on how we went from crawling to driving, and how we ultimately were showing proof of value, proof of value and return on investment that was way more than 10 times of what we were spending for pen test, third-party pen test companies, and in multiple cases, multiple companies.
All right, so the early years. So in the beginning, in 2014 when Red Team started, there was basically nothing. What I mean by that, our operating picture was that all of our detections and mitigations were none of them were custom detections or mitigations. They were all just vendor out of the box, right? Plug the vendor product into the data center, and that's pretty much the state of things. And that went for like endpoint agents, email, web, the whole 9 yards. No modern custom detections. And it was so bad that we often missed our third-party pen testers. In fact, even when the third-party pen testers revealed themselves, we had trouble even going back and trying to track their movements a lot of times, right? Like the only times that we actually caught them was when like an analyst was like manually reviewing logs, right? It wasn't our products. So enter Hunt Ops. So when I came on board, within, a month or two, I and 2 other people started Hunt Ops, or hunting operations. A lot of it was based on my career at NSA. So at NSA, I worked on both the TAO side and a little bit on the NTOC side, so the attacker side and the defender side, right? The Hunt Ops had 2 main purposes. First, and most common to the industry that all of you would agree with me on, is looking for previous and active exploitation on the network, looking for a bad guy on the network, right? The second, and not everyone in the room will agree with me on this for sure, but the second was gap hunting. So looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, attack vectors. And just to be clear, we're not talking like CVE type vulnerabilities like you find with Nessus or OpenBAS, right? We're talking like best practice type vulnerabilities or business logic. So Red Team was created in response to the gap hunting portion of Hunt Ops. Red Team's initial purpose, in addition to gap hunting like we just talked about, was to trigger IREs, or incident response exercises. So IREs help and they still to this day, help our first responders keep their incident response skills sharp. Because in an environment like ours, we don't actually have too many real incidents per year. Yeah. All right, so the early years. One word I would summarize the early years is trust. In the beginning, we basically had no trust with management or leadership. To just give you an example, when we went to our leadership about launching a port scan in the environment, we got a lot of pushback about that because of availability concerns. Like David already mentioned, our company is super conservative when it comes to risk like that, availability type concerns and things of that nature. So we had to take baby steps and gain trust with everyone. And that's a tip I would leave with you guys that are about to start your red team, or maybe just started your red team, is you're probably not going to be able to get to full-blown red team operations overnight. You're going to have to start off with like some super basic script kiddie looking stuff, right, to gain that trust. Handout. So I noticed a couple of people came in. It looks like you already have handouts. If you don't have a handout, though, there's a couple extra handouts up here. It'll be very important as we move on through this presentation. So you don't want to miss that. Thank you. Appreciate it. So we have a few of our ops listed on these slides. We're only going to cover some of them. I mean, on any given year, we have, what, maybe 4 or 5 ops. Would that be a good average number? But we're only going to be covering 1 or 2 a year. Again, just to kind of give you a sense of how we built it up slowly. One of the ops, the first op that we'll talk about, and you'll see more details about this on your handout, number 1 and number 2. Employee account lockout. So in this op, this is where we harvested usernames from our public web servers, from open source intel, etc. We took those usernames and then hit external services at USAA just with random passwords. So we weren't trying to, launch any kind of brute force attack or anything to guess the passwords. It was simply denial of service attack to lock up the accounts, right? Because what Red Team had found is that the MFA token was not being checked before the password bounced against AD. So again, if you look at your handout number 1 and number 2, some more details on that. But what I would say, a tip, actually your handout has tips for the red side and blue side, in case you haven't realized that. I think everything we have, you have 1 or 2 tips for red, 1 or 2 tips for blue, so everyone should be happy. The biggest takeaway though for this one is a tip I would leave with Blue Team. You got to remember, MFA by default with a lot of vendors doesn't necessarily prevent account lockout if that token is not being verified and checked first. So just keep that in mind when you go back to your work Monday. Have that checked, right? So with several of our ops, in general, even to this day, we need stealthy malware that we can get through for the op. Really quick to build malware. We don't want to spend months, right, doing development on malware because, like David already mentioned, there's only one full-time red team member, me, and I don't have time to create new malware every op, right? We also need malware that not only avoids detection with the AV product that we have on our endpoint, but avoids AV detection and security detection all through our stack. So those that come from large organizations like we're from, you're probably like us and you have half a dozen or more security products that are scanning things before they make it to your user. Your email, even your next-gen firewalls, your endpoint EDR, your AV, etc., right? So we had to find ways for that malware to avoid all of that stuff. So what we found ourselves doing, really still to this day, but certainly back in 2014, was a lot of script-based malware. So your Python, your PowerShell, your C script, etc. And also jar-based malware. Because what we found out, and again, this is still true to this day for many AV vendors, is AV vendors often ignore non-PE based malware. So keep that in mind, Red Team. Check out number 4. In your handout for some more details on that. Bottom line for Blue Team here, you're going to have to do hard work, Blue Team, to catch this stuff. you're going to have to baseline normal activity, specifically normal activity for your interpreters. So interpreters such as Python, PowerShell, Perl, if you're running Perl in your environment, especially in a Linux environment, right? The common scenario that we throw around at work is we want to know when a non-IT type person is running a Python script. Because that's super weird for like a CSR to be running a Python script, right? And the only way to get there is the hard work of baselining out normal activity.
Hey Robert, what's
Hey.
a CSR?
Oh, good. Thank you, Pete. Good question. CSR, Customer Service Rep. Thank you, Pete. All right, so end of year review. So at the end of 2014, we were closer to what we call just like the bad guy operations, real red team operations. Our management leadership still had concerns about us going full blown, just like the bad guy, phishing email, get a rat, pivot, etc. Right? There were still some concerns, mainly about availability of us doing that. But we were getting close. As far as time invested, at this time, all red team members were part-time. So we were all about 20% red in 2014. And of course, 80% blue. But we're looking forward to the future and moving towards real operations.
All right. So we labeled this one as one step forward, two steps back. So for all our dual fans in here. So real quick, the audience, how many of you are IT admins or sysadmins? What about blue team, defenders, malware guys, all that kind of fun stuff? What about red teamers? Nice. Cool. All of you guys are awesome. And students? All right, cool. Hopefully you choose the right people. All right, so 2015, right? We labeled that one step forward, two steps back. The reason is management, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later. So this was the year I came on board to USA, and a lot of what our discussions were during the pre-op, red team op, the during red team op meetings were not so much what we can do for the products, the tools, the processes, the people, or the security of USA. It was what can we do for our incident responders and to give them that stimulation to fight, the good fight. And I mean, as you probably can tell, that's not a good place to be. All right, so we had to fake it a lot in 2015, but there was still a lot of good that came from it. The first one is macro docs. So one thing we were finally given the approval to do was send in malicious documents using macros. Macros as well as OLE object or embedded objects. This was really good for us on the red team because it allowed us to really test that flow, that email flow coming from whatever relay or whatever email provider, and then coming inbound to our Outlook client. It allowed us to go through that whole stack and try and break as well as try and bypass all of the security products. And you'll see on the handout, there's some really cool stuff that we found that year. And our main security provider allowed us to release it, so it's some really cool stuff. On the blue side, this allowed us to really start working the flow of email threats, tracking them, creating those. I don't know if anybody was in the talk I think it was 2 or 3 ago, where he was talking about the phishing documents and having to create PowerShell scripts. So we did the same thing. Now we use EWS and API and way quicker and a lot easier. But at the time we were using Exchange scripts with PowerShell. We also were building flows that we could then take all the indicators from the emails and correlate those with our intel providers. Next one was data exfil. On the red side, we wanted to see, all right, we've got protections for certain protocols, and if a website is uncategorized, we automatically block it. But we wanted to see, all right, the stuff that is making it out, how easy is it to detect a massive exfil all the way down to a trickle, and then go to do the same thing through multiple protocols. On the blue side, we realized that DLP really was only catching the super obvious stuff at the time, and at And in that same regard, our DLP team was a little more separated than where they are now. So we usually wouldn't get those alerts until it was too late. So because of this, we had to look at the data exfil piece from a whole different perspective. We needed to look at bytes out from the firewalls, from the web proxies, from all those different platforms, and we needed to build alerts based on the number of bytes out, based off of log streams, different protocols, and then we also initiated a more robust blocking of protocol standards, conforming to protocol standards. The big thing, right? 2015, there was a lot of fakeness that we still had to do, but we did do some really cool things. Unfortunately, as we mentioned, our company doesn't want to really, they're risk avoidance. So we had to emulate a lot of stuff with regards to certain companies. If we were trying to send in a LinkedIn fish, it had to go through legal, and there was a lot of issues with that. But eventually, in 2016, we got all of that working, and have no fear, 2016 was going to be a year.
All right, so going legit. So we're 2 years in now, and we finally make it to full-blown, again, what we call just like the bad guy operations, right? So we're starting to partake of the fruit of our labor now. Just keep in mind, guys, again, the red team guys, right? Management can really make or break things for you, right? Management and leadership can fight battles for you. So if they're not on your side, it makes things really tough. And in 2016, we're back with a really good manager that's fighting these battles for us. And I think that was one of the big keys. So all ops started with the question, what detection or mitigation gap keeps you up at night? So red team would meet together in a circle, like literally, right, face to face, and say, everyone answer that question. What's kind of that one thing on your mind that keeps you up at night? And the answer to that question that we would all agree on eventually after discussion led into what the next op was. So in other words, our deficiencies on the blue side was driving red. Another thing we did different is we stopped pretending. So up until 2016 through 2015, often we would pretend that it wasn't red team. So when the incident kicked off, we would say, hey, it doesn't matter if it's red team, treat it like it's real, we're not going to tell you. Or a lot of times we would even be out of the office unreachable. Like they just wouldn't know. They would have to assume it was real. But in 2016, we stopped pretending. We would announce, as soon as the incident was declared, we would announce, hey, this is a red team exercise, still need to fight it like it's real, but this is a red team exercise. And what that did for us, a couple of things. One is it made things safer from a deconfliction standpoint. So a couple of times we'd have a scenario where they were working another group of events that they thought was related to what they were suspecting it was red team, right? But they started working another group of events, and we found out about that and was like, oh crap, that's not us, right? That might be for real. So it helped deconflict stuff like that. But also, and I think the biggest key here and the biggest benefit of announcing it right from the get-go is we are now able, and still to this day, side saddle with blue team during an incident response. So when your incident responders are working this, red team members, we're literally physically sitting beside a blue team member, giving them kind of tips and hints along the way. So they're still getting training opportunity, but they're not here just bashing their head against the screen, right? And then we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so 2016, a few of our ops that we'll cover. One was targeting customer-facing employees. So this is where we created fake member accounts. Actually, they were real accounts, just with fake information, on our .com presence. And then we uploaded malware to our CSRs, our customer service reps. Number 8 in your handout has a little more detail on that. Basically, a high-level overview is we were not thoroughly inspecting our documents that were being sent through the member portals to our CSRs. So we had really good detections and mitigations from like an email attachment perspective and a web download perspective. But stuff you uploaded through .com to a member account, we basically had like Avast AV or something stupid running, right? It was pretty much nothing. And this is a tip I would leave with Blue, and I think it's on your handout too. Any avenue that you have to get documents into your environment, make sure it's run through a thorough security stack, just like anything else is. And in our case, and one thing I would recommend to Blue Team here, especially those like in the financial industry or those that have members that are uploading documents to you, consider flattening documents. So that's another thing we did, is any Microsoft Word or PDF that comes in, for example, Excel, whatever, that comes in, we flatten those. So, consider flattening those to like a JPEG image, right? That removes all active code. All right, another op that we carried out in 2016, we attacked our physical control systems. So not a whole lot of detail I'm going to be able to share on this one for obvious reasons, but just remember, physical control systems are often tied into your corporate network. Not only are they tied into your corporate network, but often they're controlled by traditional like Windows workstations, right? So in other words, traditional techniques that you use to get into the environment and gain persistence and things of that nature, those are probably the same techniques that you can use to take over a physical control system. So in this op, what we did, we remotely exploited USA's physical control system, and we buzzed ourselves in all the way from the street, no badges, buzzed ourselves in all the way from the street to both data centers. We did both data centers. So it was actually a pretty fun op. It was pretty good. It was awesome. And we videoed the whole thing, so it was really cool. Yeah. All right, so the other one I'll talk about is polymorphic worm. I can't give any details on this one, but I'll just say the reason we want to bring this one up is if your red team gets to a point where your management leadership allows you to release a self-propagating polymorphic worm in your environment with basically no kill switch, you know you're pretty trusted, right? I mean, we did have some fail safes in there, but they were shaky at best. Luckily, nothing bad happened, and again, it's all about trust. All right, so wrapping up 2016. So red team members are now operating at about 1/3 of the time as red. And during blue team times, during the 2/3 of blue team time, red team members, specifically David and I, we are creating hundreds of detections. Because of the work that we were doing on the red side and directly bringing that well, I can't even talk. Because of the work we were doing on red and then immediately turning around and building detections when we came back on blue, our detections were becoming super strong in 2016 and just continued getting stronger.
All right, so 2017, the year we shot ourselves in the foot. All right, so with Robert and I, we created about 94% of our custom detections. These stemmed from network, email, web, DNS, reported phishes, endpoints, etc. Because of this, we really needed to step up our game as a red team and do things that we hadn't done in the past. So 2017, this was an incredible year for us as red teamers. We had a lot of influence at Derby and a lot of the other conferences. So the first one, extreme caution on workstations. So we were having a really hard time trying to get that initial foothold from the outside without triggering alarms. And we were just about to call it when we came up with the idea, well, what if we rename, PowerShell to a different name? And then what if we change that name to a different extension? So, pro tip, right? Everybody loves pro tips. So we renamed the EXEs to all sorts of different extensions, but my favorite one out of all of them is .gif, right? Or GIF, whatever. Choose one, choose GIF. All right. So in the macro, right, when you send it in, you rename PowerShell.exe, you have your, an encoded payload as part of it, and you before you run that macro with that PowerShell command, you change PowerShell.exe to spurs.gif. And then it runs the macro takes that GIF as an executable and runs that code. And so what happens? We have a whole bunch of incident responders trying to figure out why spurs.gif is communicating out to Azure or wherever. And so that was pretty awesome. Because of that though, we're like, crap, how are we going to detect this? So because of that, we needed to come up with a whole new suite of detections, and we call them our not detections. These were not PowerShell, not WScript, not CScript, not CMD.exe. We've got dozens of these. And this has found a lot of malware, because a lot of malware authors are going this route. All right, blue is red. So we attempted this earlier in the year. We have our blue team members that were just getting pissed off because it felt like we were just pounding them in the head left and right. And so we said, all right, join the red side, it's gonna be fun. And started off super high. I mean, they're building, keyloggers in different languages and things are going well. However, they still had the blue team job and they couldn't find the time. And so it quickly fizzled. We then took our summer interns and, because they found the bug in our MFA tool, and so we took them and said, hey, you're our new blue is red, come with us. And with that MFA bug, they were able to gain access onto the network and then propagate or, expand from there. And so this was really a really cool project for our summer interns to go back to. Our summer interns from last year, we still talk to a lot of them. They had classmates that went to Microsoft, Amazon, all sorts of places, and by far the feedback that we got from them is they had the best experience out of all of them. So on the blue side, the big win for us was we were again able to contribute back to the vendor. And you'll see on there, on the handout, we contribute back a lot. We're not trying to take any credit for it, but the more we can do for the community, the better. All right, my favorite one out of all of them is smash and grab. Anybody go to Derby last year? All right, so there was a talk by Ben 10, and there was also a talk by Mick Douglas. And so Mick Douglas said malware is now going where it's now getting to the point where it'll come in, get in the network, do a whole bunch of enumeration and other stuff for 60 seconds, clean up, and bounce, right? So then we had, and then Ben 10, his was talking about, you know what? Don't worry about all the mitigations, worry about detections, and all these like easy ways to keep your access on the network from a pen test perspective. So we came back and said, all right, screw all the detections and mitigations and all that kind of fun stuff. Let's throw 1,000, 2,000, 5,000, was it 10,000?
I think we did 10,000.
Yeah. 10,000 emails.
We got some pushback from Blue on that, some flag afterwards, like, you gotta clean all this crap up.
So all of these with different pretexts, totally different pretexts, different malware, all in different languages. Some run on memory, some on disk. Some that were just doing enumeration and massive exfil, and some that were trying to propagate. Yes, sir.
How much prep did that take?
So all three team members did completely different things to make sure all the campaigns were different. We each did 2 campaigns.
Yeah.
And we probably spent 2 months, was it about 2 months total?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All different, all different technologies, all different exfil vectors, the whole 9 yards.
Okay.
One of the ones for the red teamers here, one of the languages that you should learn is Go. Right? If you develop in Go, 99.9999% of the time, AV is not going to catch it. Pro tip. All right, so as all that, so we did tons of enumeration, tons of exfil, and we were exfilling gigs or terabytes. It was crazy. And so with the goal of giving Blue something totally different that they hadn't seen before. Most of the time, third-party pen testers and internal red teams are that low and slow and they're more surgical and tactical in how they get their targets. So on the Blue side, this was a huge learning point for them. There was one point where a Blue team member came up to us and said, "Please just make it stop." All right, so because of this, we had to rebuild a lot of our incident playbooks. Everything had always been that low and slow method, easier to contain, and so we needed a way to stop that bleeding, like right then and there. We needed to say, just screw it, unplug the internet. We also needed that non-emotional way to say, should we block or should we just watch and monitor? Because watching and monitoring, that gives you a lot of intel on who your actors are and what their end goal is. And a lot more time was also pushed towards mitigations. which was a good thing. Lastly, the remote access piggybacking. This one was red team attacking BYOD devices, gaining access, and then hopping on to our Citrix clients. And from there, bouncing onto the domain and expanding from there, moving laterally. This was a ton of fun because on the blue side, this gave that ammunition for us to relook at the way that we did that Citrix layout. There was a lot more push towards MFA. From a defender's perspective, we got more logs, which meant more detections, and it also allowed us to tighten our security policies. All right, so 2017 was an incredible year from as a red teamer, but most importantly, as a defensive security perspective. We had a couple of third-party pen test companies that did assessments for us during 2017, with the exception of one company who gained access onto our network for 5 minutes, if that, before getting the boot. Everybody else failed. One company went as far as calling quits, mailing a trusted agent a pwn plug, having that pwn plug plugged into one of like a few ports in our domain that does not have 802.1x, and then tried to exfil and have C2 over DNS and web, and those failed. So then he unplugged all of that and then did all his exfil over 3G. So he cheated. And so, yeah. So because of this, because of the trust and confidence that we had gained in our execs, our leadership, and our board, we now have the backing to start making red team positions full time.
And one thing we didn't mention, I'll go back and touch on it, but the smash and grab, I think we learned more from a blue perspective on that one than pretty much any other one. Like, one thing David did mention is like with the email stuff, when we were sending in 5,000 emails and stuff like that, our automated processes, most of them that David created, that goes in and deletes those emails from the Exchange server, those like completely blew up during that op because they couldn't handle the load. And that, kind of gave insight on that, which David immediately turned around. I think like the next day, right? Pretty much had all that stuff fixed. It's just something you don't think about, right? So red team definitely makes blue stronger. The other thing is from a red team perspective, he's mentioned the Go language, right? And your exfil. I guess those are two unique things because I built one of my 6 campaigns among the 3 of us, right? Josh can tell you too at the back of the room. I built mine in Go language, and I'm like, I'm probably going to do some avoidance. Like nothing detected, nothing flagged, right? So another huge win for blue. Like, holy crap, we're completely blind to this. David used an exfil vector. I probably won't mention the specific one, but one that should not have been allowed. Network guys that had that locked down for 20 years, right? Probably longer than that. And David's like, I'll just give it a try, right? And it went right through. So red team really highlighted a lot of blue stuff during that op. It was a really good op. But anyway, I saw it. So present day, 2018. Management gave me the approval to go full-time red team. Unfortunately, it's taken about 6 to 9 months for me to transition off of my blue team task. Because again, as David mentioned and we mentioned earlier, between David and I, 94% of the detections are ours, so roughly half the blue team detections are mine. And it's taken a long time to get that transition off my plate, as well, and not just the production ones that I was maintaining, but the ones that I still had in development. So that's why it wasn't just an overnight switch, right? As far as tasking, there's really no new task. It just formalizes some of the stuff that red team's been doing for years. Red team's still very much involved in blue, though, in making blue stronger. Just to give you an idea, and again, David's already mentioned it once, is he's leading the detection team during his blue team time, right? And I'm still doing product evals, proof of concepts for the latest named threat that you hear about, proof of concepts to help prioritize our detection efforts. Because I mean, like a lot of you guys, we have 400 or 500, I don't know, is it up that high now? Detection ideas in the queue, like hundreds of detection ideas in the queue. Trying to prioritize that is a nightmare. So building proof of concepts and realizing how easy it is to exploit something helps drive those priorities. So we're both still making blue, we're both still directly making blue stronger. All right, this is the good one. You guys ready for this one? It's a good slide.
This is the best slide.
This is it. Best slide of the whole brief. Blue Team found us. Why is this the best slide of the whole brief? So for the first time in 4 years, Blue Team caught us this year. Before we intended to get caught, right? Like we already mentioned, Red Team normally goes on, completes our operation, and then we do it getting noisy, right? So there's incident response value from it. But that's on our time schedule. We do it on purpose. This year was the first time Blue Team caught us before we intended to. This proved how much they had learned. Again, like I mentioned earlier, for 2 years prior to this, during incident response exercises, Red Team members are sitting with Blue, giving them training during incident response. So that helped them to do better hunting beforehand and actually catch us, as well as, potentially real evil if we get them on the network one day, right? So this is the best metric for your Red Team in terms of success. Like if you want to look for a metric to gauge how good your Red Team's doing, this is a great metric. Sounds backwards, right?
So we've got two people here that actually were part of that
yes.
team that found us.
John
John, right in the back.
is with Mark, he's not here. They're on our hunt team. Those guys are actually the ones that found us.
And then we've got JR over here. But
Yeah.
yep. You guys.
Yeah, you guys are out. All right, so your turn. Build your Red Team. So remember, Red Team is a prime bad guy target as well, right? Because why hack into a corporate network when it might be easier to hack into your Red Team's network or system and just piggyback on them, right? So be sure you're following best practices, like seen here on the slide, encryption and MFA and all that kind of good stuff, right? Some other things to consider, and I think one of the biggest game changers for us as far as accelerating Red Team is getting a pre-approval letter. So one of the Red Team members at the time had this idea of, well, first of all, let me set the stage. So up until 2000, was it end of 15, beginning of 16, I think is when this happened. Every time we did an op, we had to go through 8, 10, 12 people, depending on what the op was, to get approval from everyone. Get approval from our boss, his boss, the CISO, the physical security if it involved physical, HR if it involved something like an HR type phishing email, et cetera, all the way down the line. So that took quite a bit of time to get those approvals in place. So what his name's Eric, he had this idea of getting things pre-approved. So basically it's a letter that says, hey, these are our bounds that we're going to work in. Bounds like, hey, we're not going to affect more than 10 employees per op. We're going to have encryption at every level. We're going to minimize the amount of exfil, just enough to prove the point. We're going to have weekly oversight meetings with a tech fellow, things like that. All in a letter, spelled out, approved by the CISO, and we don't have to go ask permission when we pull off an op now. It's just David and I and Josh, we just get together and say we're doing it, and we roll. We can still go outside those parameters, obviously, and we have, like with polymorphic worm, we definitely affected more than 10 employees, right? It was like hundreds. But you just have to get the approvals at that time, right? So anyway, I highly recommend you doing this for your Red Team. Another thing, time box your IREs. So when you get noisy and your incident responders are working it, what we found is sometimes a couple of ours ran 2 to 3 days. And what we found is Blue Team would get just completely burned out. I mean, they wouldn't even want to come into work. They hated us. They hated coming to work, right? It was awful. So what we found is for our crew, it would probably be different for yours, but for our crew, it was about 8 to 10 hours. After about 8 to 10 hours, people aren't learning as much anymore, and like I said, they're just getting frustrated. So time box your IREs. To help with that, give hints. And I already mentioned this once, but when you're sitting as a Red, when you're a Red Team member sitting with Blue, your first hour or two of incident response, you're probably not going to be giving any hints. You're probably not going to be saying anything. But maybe 2 hours in, when they're doing a sync, maybe you drop a little hint. Or when you're sitting with a Blue Team member, you drop another hint. And as the day goes on, as you get 4, 6, 8 hours in, you start dropping more and more hints. With some of ours, just to give you some specific examples, right? With some of ours, when they're going and they pull a full process list and they start analyzing each process, confirming checksums, confirming signatures, etc. You say, hey, why don't you look at these 5, right? Like one of yours is your malware and the other 4 is, you don't even know what it is, but it looks weird. And that just that narrows it down for them. They're still doing the analysis. They're still doing what they would have done, but instead of it taking 2 hours for them to step through all those processes, they can do it in like 5 minutes. So things like that. Yeah, again, the idea is to provide training to your blue team and incident responders, not to exhaust them so they resent you. All right, final thoughts. So again, it's not gonna happen overnight. Took us 2 years to get to full-blown red team operations, and 4 years to even get one full red team member. Oh yeah, this is actually the most important slide. So what is red team's purpose? Someone tell me what red team's purpose is.
Make it look better.
What's that?
Make it look better.
That's right, that's exactly right. So that is the primary, actually, that's really the only guiding principle behind red team. Make blue stronger, make blue better.
Yeah, what happens to them along the way? Well,
Yeah,
not talking about that.
exactly.
You know.
Exactly. So yeah, if you guys remember nothing else from David and I's talk, just remember that line. Red team's purpose is to make blue team stronger. You're not competing. You're not trying to beat blue team up or something, right? The point is to make them stronger.
Why is blue team curled up in the corner again?
Exactly. You went too far if that happens.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So that's it. We'll wrap it up. Again, huge thanks for you guys for coming out and listening to our talk. Say a huge thanks to our families. You guys know when you're doing something new like this and you're building something new, there's a lot of sacrifices at home made. So a huge shout out to our families, and specifically my son Riley, who's been helping us today, passing out the handouts and stuff like that. So thanks for being here, buddy. I think he was at the lock picking village for what, the first half of the day, right? Did you get pretty much all the locks done?
Yeah.
I roll up, he's in handcuffs, he says, "Dad, watch this," and like a half a second, he's out. And I personally want to thank all current and former Red Team members. Again, David and Josh are my current Red Team members. Huge shout out to you guys. Super bright, super sharp. And specifically David also. David, I put together pretty much all the content of this presentation and had it literally in a text document, and David took it, refined it, made it all pretty in slides. So if it weren't for David, this would be like in Vim or something, right? So, David's awesome. And also, I'd like to thank management. Again, we already mentioned management can make great things, and we are under a super awesome manager right now.
All right, one more thing. Well, a couple more things, real quick. Also, we want to say thank you to Bill Wright, who's our senior advisor, our mentor, the tech fellow, and most importantly, being our top cover when we needed him. When you piss off the physical security guys by getting from the street into the data centers, it's pretty awesome to have that top cover. And he's also a former NSA guy too, so there's a lot of shenanigans that happen behind closed doors. It's pretty awesome. Thank you guys to B-Sides, and thank you all for coming. To the dads here, happy early Father's Day. And does anybody have any questions? All right, my former coworker.
What is dirty tizzle stand
Dirty Tizzle. So it's a super long story,
for? Okay.
and I'm not going to say it right here because it involves stuff that I should not say at work. But, all right, so one other thing, on the slide, you'll see a reference to a URL or the website. Go check that out. There's a lot of really cool stuff that has been done, a lot of really good research, probably with a lot of similar tools that you guys are using at your guys' employment, and a lot of, tip of the spear type of stuff. Other than that, thank you guys, and best of luck in the rain. Welcome back to your car.